right, everybody. So a new episode of Once Upon a Boot. I have my guest this week, Rachelle, and she's joining us here. She's a Marine veteran. Do you want to introduce yourself for the listeners?
Yeah. Well, crap. What do we say? All right. I'm Rachelle. I'm a Marine veteran. I joined in 2009 and got out 2013. So I did my 4 years. I'm a 35-31, got out as a corporal. And since then, I've been working at the same place that took me kind of straight out of the Marine Corps. I got my degree and I started a nonprofit. So
Yeah,
is
and I
that
see
good?
you. Yeah, I see you. When I first discovered you, going through like different veteran type stuff on Instagram, and you're super active in the veteran community, which is something that
Mhm.
really grabbed my interest because there's a lot of vets, which I'm sure that you've seen as well, that kind of talk the talk, but they don't necessarily like walk the walk with actually helping out other veterans. And you're somebody that is always like supporting other veteran owned businesses. You're always, giving people, links and resources to go to and stuff like that. So it was something kind of cool and refreshing to see in the vet community. Because a lot of times I think veterans can be our own worst enemies,
I
especially in the
agree.
veteran community.
I agree. I feel like as veterans, we're exploited a lot.
Yeah.
And it's cool to say you're helping a veteran, but I think it's different when you have this mentality of this is your family, and I may
Yeah.
not personally know you, but you're automatically family as a veteran.
Yeah.
And so I try to, when I'm promoting anything, I will only promote what I feel in my heart is genuine. And if I feel like somebody who's exploiting a veteran, I'm not interested. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel the same way. And it's weird. The veteran community is so diverse, right? And it's one of the things that I try to do with this podcast. The whole premise is like, even though we're so different, we're also so similar. We all have these, horrible, cringeworthy booter experiences that we go back and look at. We all kind of develop from there, but we all go on to do such different things when we get out. And we're a lot different than just, I think, the stereotypical image that comes to people's minds when they hear the word veteran, because everybody kind of thinks of one thing, but we're so different yet so similar at the same time. So let's get into a little bit about you first. When you first joined the Marines, what made you want to be a Marine in the first place? What led you to that path?
I wish I had this beautiful story to tell you. So I will say that I'm an Army brat. And actually, I hail from a family that is very pro-military, has a lot of veterans in my family. Not one are in the Marines. Not one were a Marine,
Okay.
or are a Marine, I should say. And transparently, I tried to join the Navy.
Okay.
But what ended up happening, because I'm from a small town, in this small town, there's really only two recruiters that are stationed there permanently, and it was the Marine Corps and the Army. And the Marine Corps' recruiting station was right next to the Navy's. And so anytime I went to meet with my Navy recruiter, I would have to wait for him to drive up about an hour. So I'd be sitting there waiting because you're never late, right?
Yep.
And the
Yep.
Marine Corps recruiter saw me waiting in there, and he had said, "Do you ever think about the Marine Corps?" And I literally said to him, cheerleaders don't join the Marine Corps. I said, "Do not." And he was like, "All right, let me show you otherwise." So I saw these awesome promotional videos, and I was like, transparently, like I didn't even know Marines consider themselves the best. But then once I had in my head this was the best, and if I'm going to do it, I want to join the best. I was like, okay, I'm in. So that's my like non-romantic story of joining the Marine Corps.
It's funny that you say that because I obviously joined the Navy, but when I would also go and wait for the Navy recruiter, the Marine recruiter for weeks would be like, "Hey, come sit in my office. Come sit in my office." And I actually, I had tattoos when I joined, like a lot of tattoos, and I wanted to hide them because I didn't know kind of the rules. So I would wear long sleeves every time that I went. And finally, one day I rolled my sleeves up, and then the Marine recruiter kicked me out of the office. He's like, "Man, you got all these tattoos."
I
He's like, "Get the fuck out of here."
know.
I was like, "Oh, okay. I'm
The
sorry."
irony too is when I got my degree, I wanted to go officer, and so obviously the first recruiting I went to was Marines. Well, at that time I had my sleeve, and they basically laughed me out of the office, and they're like, "All right, well, let's point you in the direction of some branch that'll take you." So, Air Force, Navy, I think. I can't recall what it was about the Navy because it wasn't that I didn't have a technical degree. I just can't specifically recall, or maybe my tats did make me out of reg. But then my only choice was the Army, and I was like, all right, well, my military career's done. So no disrespect, I'm an Army brat.
Yeah, when I joined, I already had my bachelor's degree. So I tried to also be an officer. Same thing, I got disqualified for my tattoos. So I was like, okay, well, I guess the Navy will still take me enlisted. And they sold it like, well, you won't be an officer. You'll be a non-commissioned officer. Same thing. I was like, oh, totally.
Yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah. So you join the Marines, you get to boot camp. When you first get to boot camp, is it what you imagined it would be like? Did you watch like Full Metal Jacket and you're assuming that's what it's going to be? You know, is it completely different? What are your thoughts when you first got there?
So when I went, he never really showed me, my recruiter never really showed me what boot camp was like until after I signed. And then I remember getting back into his office after I went to MEPS, and he's like, let me show you boot camp. And so he showed me this video, and about 10 minutes in, I had to have him turn it off because I started like panicking. And so I just kind of went into it blindly. This was 2009, so Google wasn't as big as it is now. And I'm kind of blessed in that sense because I just kind of went in and said, do what you have to do. And that's how I survived. So I didn't really have too many expectations. I went in there and became a robot. And that's what they love. And that's what it was. So,
yeah. And it's such a weird place. I always looked at it when I was there as I've seen some real like dirt bags make it out of boot camp. If they can do it, I can obviously do it. So, that's kind of the mindset I kept. And then, when you leave boot camp, right, that's the initial point where I always say you always feel like you make it in the military. And then whenever you get to the next spot, you realize that you're at the bottom of the food chain, like all over again. Mm-hmm. So it's like you make it out of boot camp, you're a Marine, or I made it out of boot camp. I'm like, yeah, I'm a sailor now. And then, you get to your first duty station and you're just like the worst, most boot, just, everyone kind of shits on you. Yeah. What were you like, did you get like a big head at all after you got out of boot camp? Were you, going to the exchange, buying all the Marine shirts and all that type of stuff? Because I know I did for the Navy.
I didn't do that. What I did do, and I wrote this in my story. So in the Marine Corps, when you go to boot camp, you get this like reflective green zip up. That's for your PT gear. And I wore that home, and I have pictures of me flying home in this like green zip up. I wore my combat boots pretty much every single day of leave. Like I just thought it was cool. And then I was on recruiter's assistance as well. And so, just getting out of boot camp, when you're on RA, you get to PT the poolies, and you just feel like, like you're down here, but they're down here. So I'm going to make you feel like crap. Yeah. And one thing I also remember, and I don't know if this is a Navy thing as well, but when you have your cover, you're supposed to, so like if I'm standing, your cover, so like, what is it? The tip of your cover? I don't know. But when you're standing, you have your blues. Yeah. You stand with it like this, like it's like clutched in your hand.
Yep, it has to.
Afterwards, like after you're in the fleet for a while, you're like, oh my gosh, that is the douchiest thing. Like any Marine that drove by, any veteran, any active duty that drove by and saw me on the streets on RA holding my cover. Well, I wouldn't have done that outside, but anywhere they would have seen me, like in high schools, they're probably like, oh. So
I did a horrible thing. I went home after, and I remember I was in my service uniform. So for the Navy, that's like the peanut. We call it the peanut butters. It's the khaki with the black pants.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to my old college to like talk to the class about the Navy and what it's like. I had just got out of boot camp. I don't know what the fuck it's like.
Let me
So
tell
I
you.
was up there, and looking back, there was a vet in the class who was an ex-Marine, and he was in the front row, and he was like smiling the whole time because he probably thought I was the fucking worst.
Douchiest person.
Yeah. He didn't call me out, and I'm so happy he didn't, but I think about him all the time, like that kid probably thought I was the worst. So,
Everybody knows what it's
but
like. I mean, everybody, you're so
yeah,
proud.
we were all
Yep.
that way.
And one thing
Yeah.
that I don't like, so I always talk about this like bro vet type culture. We're always trying to one up each other
Yeah.
and like, did your service matter? Oh, well, where'd you deploy? That's the first question that people ask. I hate that, and I hate people downplay experiences in boot camp, especially for those that have deployed, and that's just like they act like it was nothing. But I remember the sense of when you first graduate. It's such a proud moment, and so to have those boot experiences, we're all going to have them, whether you deployed or not, whether your experience, whatever your experience was, whether you have 5 cars and it doesn't matter. Everybody was like that because going through that experience, it's so difficult for everybody. And just to have that first reassurance that
It is.
I can accomplish this. Okay, then we're going to be boots. We're all going to be boots because we're super proud. So
Yeah, it's like everybody goes through that awkward teenage phase
we're all
where,
kids.
you look back and you're like, oh, how did I wear that? How did I do my hair that way? Oh, the music was so bad. It's the same thing. You got to go through it. You got to blow your money on dumb
Yep.
stuff. You got to, go to the mall wearing your PT uniform. And so we all did that. And you look back on it and you can like laugh about it. So it's all good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first get out and you're going to your first duty station, you're going through school. Is deploying on your mind? Is that something that you're looking forward to? That you're like, maybe I won't have to deploy? What are your thoughts when you first get to your duty station?
My first thoughts, so my first duty station, I got there and they're like, we're deploying. And I was like, wait a minute, we're at war? So, I mean, they definitely would tell you things in boot camp, like there's a possibility, but I was just as ignorant as everybody else.
Sure.
I was 19, I was selfish, and I thought Iraq was the only war.
Yeah.
So imagine my surprise when they're like, hey, you're going to go to Afghanistan for a year. I was like, oh, okay. So I didn't even really have expectations. I went into everything ignorant, which in retrospect, in my 30s, I'm kind of thankful I did.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if I would have been as courageous enough to even sign up transparently.
Sure.
I don't know what I would have done because I went into everything blindly. So
that's not a bad way. It's not a bad way to go. I always had the rule on the ship. Whenever we got a new sailor, I would always tell my guys, I'm like, don't tell them anything about the ship. Let them form their own opinion. Let them experience things for the first time. Don't warn them about certain things because then it's organic. It's natural. It's not like, hey, just so you know, this guy sucks or this event sucks or, oh, this is going to be the worst. Like you got to let people kind of feel for themselves and form their own opinions and get their own experiences.
Exactly. I can't say you shouldn't go into everything without preconceived notions. I mean, again, it would be so much different if I did this in my 30s, but I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And so I was very ignorant, and I'm the last person to claim heroism whatsoever. I didn't do anything with that in the back of my mind. I wanted to get away. I knew this was the perfect opportunity. I didn't want to pay for college.
Yeah.
That's like the honest to God truth. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you are getting ready to deploy for the first time, do you have family that's with you? Are you, solo by yourself living in the barracks? What's your situation at that time?
I was by myself. My family did come down close to the week that I deployed, because you don't technically always know the date.
Yeah.
But they did come down, and that was in a very, very, very emotional time. But I think the hardest time that I had was not actually leaving. It was coming back.
Really?
I didn't have anybody. So I
Okay.
came back to nobody, and you kind of see, everybody's kind of used to those pictures of when you come back, you see families with these signs and stuff like that.
Sure.
Well, I was actually supposed to come back at a later date, and they pushed me up. And so I had nobody. And I just remember like kind of getting my bags and like slunking off. Like, you're not even supposed to drive, because at that point I haven't driven in America in a year. But I like luckily had a car. Another Marine had dropped off a car for me. So I just kind of got in my car. That was the hardest part.
That's interesting, because at least from like a ship perspective, I always remember the single sailors. Like when we pull back into port, we still have like a duty section. So it's like, hey, you're getting home from deployment, but you guys have to stay on the ship and stand watch. I remember a lot of the single sailors would be like, hey, we'll take the watch, so you guys can go home to your families and stuff. And I guess maybe for some of them it was so that they didn't have to do that, drive by themselves and walk on the pier and stuff. So
yeah, it sucks.
Yeah,
it does suck, but no fault to my family. I have to say that I have an awesome family that supported me my entire enlistment. It was just such like a last minute change, and so no fault to them whatsoever.
So when you get overseas, you're getting to your first deployment. I know how it is on a ship for a new female coming on board. I'm assuming it's got to be similar in the Marines or Army or wherever it is. Like, it's unfortunate for females in the military as it is, but you guys get to like a new thing, and there's almost like that group of like piranha douchebag military guys that are just gonna like swarm the new girl on the scene. Was that something that you had to experience when you first got overseas?
Everybody does. Anything with a vagina. Anything. I used to, again, if I look back at my whole experience, and we're not even talking deployment, this is getting to the fleet, this is getting to MCT. If there's a male there, that's what it's like. And, when you're a teenager, you're flattered by it. But in looking back at it again, as a 30-year-old, I would look at, there was some butch lesbians who would get the same amount of attention, where it's very clear they're not interested. Those are the type of individuals where, are they male or are they female kind of thing? No disrespect. Some of my best friends were those exact women, but that they would get the same level. Absolutely. So even though you kind of go through this and you're like, oh, that's so flattering, then, you look at it when you're older, like, there's no flattery to it. You literally have a vagina, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, it's just like a total creep, like weird culture thing that kind of exists in the military. And it's unfortunate, because that's what leads to a lot of like, the sexual assault cases and all the brutal stuff that kind of happens behind the scenes. But when you get over there for the first time, I've talked to a lot of boots on the ground veterans. What is your thought when you get into country? Is it what you imagined it would be? Are you scared? Are you kind of just excited? Is it, what's your feeling when you first get over there?
When I first got over there, so I was stationed at Camp Leatherneck for that entire year. And when I first got over there, a lot of what I did was at Camp Bastion. Camp Bastion's attached to Leatherneck. And so I was either on the flight line or I was at the COC, which are very safe places to be. If there's anywhere to be that safe, those are the safest places. So I really didn't have the experience of fear up until I had volunteered to do FET type work. And for those that don't know what FET means, it's Female Engagement Team. And essentially what was happening is a lot of our grunts, we were experiencing losses because in respect to the Muslim culture, we wouldn't touch females. And, the jihadists caught on to that, and they started placing dangerous things on their females. So female Marines, female service members were engaging with the grunt teams to search females and things of that nature. So you're going outside of the wire, And I can't say, even in that experience, I ever felt true fear. There was some things that happened that will definitely put your life into perspective, but it wasn't even a fear thing. I think just being outside of the wire and experiencing a culture that is so drastically different
Yeah.
than I will never experience something like that. It was such a beautiful, life changing moment that I am so freaking thankful that I got to be in their culture. I got to see that country and realize that sometimes we push Western culture when it's never going to happen. And if
Yeah.
you set boots in ground, you're going to realize it's never going to happen in countries like that. So I'm just thankful to get that perspective. But I never really truly had fear, I guess, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah, see, it's different for me hearing all these stories because, when we deploy in the Navy, I'm in the Persian Gulf just kind of floating in the Middle East Sea. So, like, we're never boots on ground. The only thing that we really see of the people are, the small boats that they have when they try to, like, test the ship. And then when we pull into ports, it's usually in the UAE, which is, Bahrain, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, that area. And you
Mhm.
experience the culture not to the same extent that you get to. But little things like, you go to a mall in Dubai, and I remember I held the door open for a female when she was walking in, and her husband started screaming at me.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I was like, oh shit, like I was just trying to be polite, hold the door open.
Yep.
And it's, little things like that where you kind of realize, like you said, puts things into perspective.
Yes. Women are property in that
Yeah.
culture, and I was able to experience that for better or worse. No matter what I experienced, there are some things that made me proud to be American, thankful to be American, but there was some things that definitely
Yeah.
put things into retrospect that sometimes your way of life is not meant for other people. And when you have a
Yeah.
culture like this, us being there for 10, 20, 50, we've been there far longer than people realize.
Yeah.
There's no changes that will be made. And if you set
No.
foot in there, you realize there's nothing that we can change. That's how they
Yeah.
want.
No.
No.
Yeah, I agree. Now, when you're deployed, I talk about this a lot. Whenever, military experience is represented in movies or TV shows or even books sometimes, I think, like, war and these battles get romanticized and that's what people focus on. But that's such a small part of a deployment. Some of that stuff lasts over the course of like a day, right?
Mhm.
It's not even that big of a time. So it's all that in between time on deployment, which are the things I think a lot of vets miss. It's the sitting around, bullshitting with your buddies, sitting around the smoke pit, even if you don't smoke, standing around doing nothing. What were some of the things that you like to do to kind of occupy your time when you were deployed, or bullshit with your friends, or whatever it was?
It was definitely the smoke pits. Life happens. Life revolves around smoke pits.
Absolutely.
Even stateside. That's just the way it is. There's so many good memories. So when I was deployed, we lived in what was called cans, which were like fancier ISO containers, and there was
Okay.
just rows of them. So like for me, it was four to a can, and then my unit had the entire row. And so you'd come home or come to your can at night, and everybody is out, hanging out in the cans, hanging outside of the cans because males couldn't go in the females. And, we were just hanging out, just, talking about our family, joking around, seeing UFOs, which totally happened. I'm going to stand by that till the day I die. But like, those are the
I
moments.
have a story about that
Yes,
too.
we totally saw one. But those are the moments that in all of the world I would never take back. I mean, there's so much fun.
Yeah, it's funny. You look back at some of the things I said, you can never find a group of people that are so bored than people on deployment with nothing to do and kind of the stuff that we make up to occupy our time. And it's like I think back to some of the things we did, and I remember everybody has like the hard drive that gets passed around with all the movies and the TV shows on it
Porn
that you try
and
to,
porn.
yeah, and porn too. and you're trying to watch as much as you can. I remember somebody in our division had a flat Earth documentary on it, and we watched it and laughed, and we were like, wouldn't it be funny if we convinced everybody in the division that we were flat earthers? And I remember, we made that our mission, just to convince people, because there was nothing else to do. It's like, what else are you going to do to kill the time? Well, let's invent a conspiracy theory and make everybody believe it.
I love it.
And as far as UFOs go, I think that I was like 100 feet tops from a UFO, and nobody on the ship believes me. But we picked up supposedly a UAV once in the middle of the Gulf. But they shut all the cameras on the ship off. They locked everybody inside the ship. They wouldn't let us outside to look at it. Only the captain was allowed topside. It was super hush hush secret. The next day there were Navy SEALs on the ship, but we never picked them up. They were just there. Then they were gone the next day. Then all of a sudden, whatever this object was gone. It was never in the news, never in the papers. I was like, we picked up a UFO. Nobody on the ship is with me.
I have no doubt. I'm a little saddened that your segue into that was conspiracy theories, because I don't think it's a conspiracy. I 100% believe what we saw was a UFO, and I've had many Marines see it.
Everybody on the ship
I'd love to have
and I was like, dude, we were near a UFO. There's no other explanation.
Yes, at least I have other Marines that can corroborate my story, because every single person was out there like, what the fuck are we looking at right now?
The Navy recently came out like, oh yeah, there's plenty of UFOs that we found that we don't know what they are. No one cares. No one cares.
I've seen the videos. Videos. Yes. Yeah, but when you experience it and you I will not talk to anybody but veterans about it, because maybe we're all so a little bit crazy that they're just like, okay, but it shouldn't have to be you're crazy. I am telling you, I know what I saw, and I know what a lot of other Marines saw, and we were just like, oh my gosh, we stood out there for an hour because it just hovered, and we were just like,
I'm with you on it. I'm with you. I totally believe it. So
100%.
When you come back home for the first time, you said you were over there for a year. When did you kind of get into your mind? Was it deployment? Was it when you got home that you weren't going to stay in? Did you decide that, when you were over there and you were like, this is not for me? Or did you plan to stay in and something else kind of came up? Or what was the deal?
I don't know if I ever planned to stay in. I actually got pregnant in the last few months of my deployment, or not my deployment, my enlistment. And it was actually my deployment that it was kind of the decision factor. So I was the only female, I think, and I apologize if any females who deployed with me if I'm misrepresenting, but I think I was one of the only females that did not have children when I deployed. Okay. And all of us were out there for a year. If you were in my unit, you were there for a year. And I, for every parent, not just women, males too, that are away from their children for that period of time or any period of time, there is so much respect for you. It's something that I couldn't do, and I knew I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
At that point, not to sound cheesy or anything, but having gone through that deployment, having witnessed so many Marines find every excuse to get out of deployment, and realizing how selfish that was to watch, even those that I love. I mean, there's Marines that I absolutely love that I watched every excuse that they used to get out of that deployment. And I thought, I'm not going to be that, because as much as I love you, I'm going to always have this little bit of resentment that somebody took your place.
Yeah.
And I didn't ever want to be that Marine. So that when I found out I was pregnant, I said, I'm done, because the Marine Corps is not going to be first. My child's going to be first. And that's the honest to God truth.
That was kind of my thinking. When I first joined, me and my girlfriend ended up getting married, soon after I joined. And I didn't plan on having kids, at least while I was in. And sure enough, it happened. So, when I first deployed, my son was, I think he was 5 or 6 months old, my first deployment. And it was weird because it's like I leave, they're 5 or 6 months, they're little, they're tiny, they're barely crawling around. And then I come home and he's running around the house and talking. And it was, after that first deployment, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Uh, and I
No.
deployed the second time, and my son at that time was 3. So he knew kind of what was happening, and like his emotions when I left, like I think about that a lot. After, like when he knew, I was like, I can't put my kids through this. Like it's just too
Hmm.
much. And it's nothing against people that stay in, but we've all kind of seen that E7, E8, E9 that's on, their second or third marriage with kids they never see, or their kids don't like them, or whatever it is. Like I just didn't want that for myself.
Yeah. Yep. That was kind of the same mentality. Just, and also to be transparent, and I've already said this, I joined, as a 19-year-old that wanted free college. And that's kind of where I left it is, okay, I'll do my service and then I want my GI Bill. And it wasn't until probably 2 to 3 years of my enlistment where I really started thinking about re-enlisting and thinking like maybe I can make this a career and stuff like that. But up until I had that mentality, so I was about 3 years in, had that mentality, and then I found I was pregnant, and I was like, that's kind of your sign.
Yeah.
It's time to call this a day.
Now, when you're getting ready to transition out, the transition process for active duty is not the best service, I'll say, that we get. It's like, you go through months of boot camp to learn about the military, how to act. And then when it's time to get out there, like, okay, like, fend for yourself sort of thing. Did you know, hey, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to try to get a job? You knew what you kind of wanted to do? Or were you kind of scrambling for things to do? What is your mindset getting out of the Marines?
I mean, I think everybody knows what they want to do. I had a newborn, and I was like, I want to be able to support my newborn. That was my
Sure.
thing. I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
I was 23 when I got out, and when you're in the military, you're really sucking from the teat. I don't care what anybody says. You really do. In that respect, you are very blessed, where you don't have to worry about, health insurance. You don't really have to worry about your paycheck if you spend your money correctly, which many don't. And I was one of them. And so I got out with nothing. And I took the first job that hired me, which was a part-time job at a gym, making minimum wage. And then I just happened to get out when the new semester, I had enough time to get into the new semester. So I actually started on the Montgomery GI Bill, which
wow.
I can have a whole conversation about that.
I did a whole spiel on a previous episode about the Montgomery. We need to pause for a second and talk about that, because I have never met anybody that used it.
You know when I used it? Because when, I don't know if they call it the same for you guys, but it's called SEPs and TAPs. When you get out for the Marines, it's separation and something. Yeah. And they had somebody come in and say, well, if you do the math correctly, you actually make more on the Montgomery GI Bill. Go, whoever that person is, go eat your own shorts, because even if that's the case, the headaches that I experienced from Montgomery, it was only one semester that I was in Montgomery before I switched to my post 9/11.
So I did research on the Montgomery, because one of the listeners pointed out to me, they're like, hey, can you talk about this? A lot of us signed up for it in boot camp and no one really knew what it was. They just kind of pitch it as, hey, you can make more money than the post 9/11. And it's something like the government makes roughly like $134 million a year off people signing up for the Montgomery. And it's like less than 1% of vets ever use it. And it's like some schools don't accept it. It's like a pain to deal with. There's like rules to how you can do certain things. I guess you actually used it, so But yeah, you're the first person I've ever talked to that actually used it.
It was, so go back to my story. All right. I had nothing. I got out. And with the number one thing that I'll never forget about the Montgomery GI Bill, even in a college that was very pro-veteran, pro-military, when you use that GI Bill, you essentially have to fund up front. And then what happens is, I think it goes by month, if I can remember correctly. So it goes month by month, where the VA does a certification every month to verify that I went to my classes for that month, blah, blah, blah. And then when they do that verification is when they issue a portion of the check. So essentially what happened, and I don't know if this has changed. This was 2013. So I don't know if it's changed. but I can say that essentially what happened is I had to fund everything for that first semester and then basically get reimbursed for it. I had nothing to fund. So
Yeah.
I had my dad actually had to pay for it, and then I had to essentially reimburse him. Whereas, and there's so many other things, like you had to actually call in. I just remember it being such a headache. And then when I made the transition to post 9/11, it was so easy.
So
You
easy.
sign up for your classes, you send the VA the certification for all of your classes, and as long as it matches up what you have for your program, I didn't hear anything. I would get to my next semester, boom, do the same thing. Whereas like with Montgomery, you had to call in every month. You had to like fund everything ahead of time. And I was like, I don't care if I make $100 more on this. It's not worth the stress.
It's not worth it. Yeah.
It's not worth it.
It was even easier for the post 9/11 for me. My school had like a veteran office, and all I did is I emailed them saying like, hey, I registered for my classes, and then they just handled everything else.
Yeah.
It was just super simple. And then you get your BAH payment every month, and you never have to worry about anything as long as you're actively taking your classes and passing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you're going to school and you're working this other job, at what point do you start to think about this foundation that you are doing now?
Well, so I started at the part-time job, and then I live in Michigan, and Michigan has an unemployment agency called Michigan Works. And Michigan Works has a veteran center. So, a lot of companies at that time were actually incentivized. They got tax breaks for hiring veterans. And I don't know if that's still a thing, but the company that I work for now had just signed on to that program. And I was actually the first veteran that they ever hired. And that was 8 years ago, and I am still at that company. I started at an entry-level position, and believe it or not, I'm actually one of the youngest directors at that company today. And when I reached that level and what I am doing, it was kind of in that moment, and I also got my degree during that time and stuff like that. It was in that moment where I felt like I was very satisfied, like professionally, but there's always been a sense in me that was missing. And that sense was you live life selfishly. I mean, I have been the type of person that's always been raised, you give back when you have the opportunity to give back, because that's how life works. And I've always missed that, because no matter what people can say about a service member, I know for me personally, I always felt like I was doing something greater than myself. And that was such a fulfilling experience. And then when I got out, I didn't have that. And I lost it. It's almost like this loss, this grief. And I was like, now you're at a point in your life where it's stable. You have a home, you can support your family. What can you do? And I'll say for anybody who experiences that, you don't have to start a 501c3 to give back. I mean, I feel like I'm always, I always have these very big dreams. You don't have to do that. But that was kind of my story, where I was like, so great for other people and myself. And I'm just saying, like, you don't always have to be that extreme. You can give back to your community without doing that. But that was kind of my truth. That's my story. So.
And that's awesome. Now talk about, what you're doing now with that. Talk about all the work that you guys do. How did you come up with the name? How did you come up with the premise of what you're doing with it?
So the name is actually a play off of my deployment. So the Enduring campaign is taking off of Operation Enduring Freedom. And, the whole concept of enduring, continuing on, things of that nature. And really this stems from, so I've done volunteer work with, it's not a transitional center. It's actually for retired veterans. There's one in Grand Rapids, and it has the same concept of a veteran transitional center in the sense that the VA funds it. They're heavily reliant on VA grants, but I feel like the world thinks if the VA is supporting it, they're getting everything they need, and that is not the case at all. And so when I started researching and started looking into, transitional centers and what that actually was and what are their needs, I realized that there's a lot of nonprofits that really focus on troops deployed, which is beautiful. And I've had them send us packages, and I am so incredibly thankful for them. But in that sense, we're kind of covered. We're covered with those overseas, but what about those that are having challenges at home? And that's where the Enduring campaign, that's where our primary focus is our brothers and sisters who are part of these programs that are actively working to make their lives better. That's a fucking beautiful thing. And we want to support them in that transition.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for, there's a lot of companies and profits and foundations that help. You always got like the care packages overseas that had candy and toothbrushes and, deodorants, which is important. But it's like you said, there's not a lot of love for the people back home that are struggling, that are homeless, that, don't really know what they're doing. So that's nice to see.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. Yep. And for those that don't know, I'll just say this, because I'm finding a lot of people don't know what a transitional center is. In fact, I've had somebody say, you mean like transitioning like sex-wise? And I was like, no, not at all. So the primary focus of those transitional centers are reintegration of veterans into the civilian world. And it does not have to mean that the veteran just recently separated. In fact, a lot of transitional centers that we work with, I would say the biggest group that they have are actually Vietnam vets, which should be no surprise to anybody. But that's the focus. And it's when we talk about reintegration, everybody thinks, oh, it's just when you newly separate. I feel like a lot of people, especially in their era, never gave them the opportunity to transition and never had that type of patience with them, where it's like they're experiencing these mental health issues, which often leads to substance abuse issues. And that's really the primary focus of the transitional centers, is to get them back on their feet and prepared for a successful life. And so that's why we focus our attention on them, is because even though what we're doing seems so small, like we just created care packages today, and it had like shaving kits and, deodorant and detergent and things like that. I know that seems really small, but when you have nothing, to have one less stressor, like how am I going to wash my hair? How am I going to wash my clothes? How do I get ready for a job interview when I don't have clean clothes? Things of that nature, like that's what our focus is on, is just whatever we can help with.
And that's something that, in my personal opinion, it's like that's the thing that's kind of lacking with the transitioning out of the military. Mm-hmm. It's like there needs to not necessarily be like you need to go to like civilian boot camp, but it's like there needs to be something that they have other than here's a 5-day course on how to write a resume and apply online to jobs, because like you said, there's so much more. It's like, when you start working, and I still learn this now, and I've been out for years now, is it's like, oh, you can't talk to people the same way that you do in the military. You can't joke around with people or play pranks or, act certain ways, dress certain ways. You can't talk about certain things. So, it's that type of stuff that they just don't teach you. So.
Well, and we talk about privilege, right? And I won't get into the political debate of privilege, but
sure.
And speaking in reference to my veteran brothers and sisters, from a privilege standpoint, when you're separating, you're making the assumption that that veteran has a home to go to basically be this safety net until they can get up on their own. And sometimes that's not the case. We also raise our veterans to be very prideful, very independent, and not want to ask for help. So you just talked about all the gaps that they face where you can't speak, the civilian language is different, the atmosphere is different, but think about it in the most simplistic sense where I get out, I have nowhere to go to, I have no way to keep my clothes clean. Like everybody is always like to the homeless community, there's so many jobs available. Why don't you just go get a job?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if that person has not bathed in 2 weeks and they do not have clean clothes and they do not have shoes to actually walk in and get the job, that is a privilege type mentality. And that is something that eventually we will want to get to advocacy. But right now, the primary focus is where we can support to give them the things that they need to be successful. Okay, we'll do that. But that's something that we're very passionate about too.
I mean, even more so than that, I remember as a teenager working in like a retail store, and I remember there was a homeless person that came to apply for a job, and my manager at the time, who was a total douchebag, like he wouldn't hire him. He's like, well, he doesn't even have an address to put on like the form. And I'm like, the dude could get an address if you like gave
If
him
you give a job, like it's like yes,
he wants to work. He wants to come to work.
goes.
Who the fuck cares where he sleeps at night? Like, you know, if they're gonna come in and work, hopefully they'll be able to have a place that they can live. So it's like it's very true what you're saying. Absolutely.
And that's what these transitional centers are doing, is giving them that foundation, which is, look, I can't say this enough. I don't give a shit if you donate to the Enduring campaign. And I don't care. I don't need a dollar. What I need the community to do is actually research these locations in your area and support them. If you want to support us, that's fine, because that's what we're doing. But if you took the time to Google locations in your area, I guarantee there are some. And that's everything I'm saying right now is exactly what these locations are trying to do. And you don't have to be a veteran to give a shit. You can just be a human that says, I can see that people want to change their lives, and encourage them that we know it takes a lot to say, I need help, especially from this community, and support them. So donate directly. I don't care. I don't care if you find them through our website. Donate directly. I love that. That's not, you know what I mean? Like, but people aren't doing that. And that's really our goal, is to just kind of push, like, what if there's somebody in Emeryville, California, that didn't know one of the locations we support is in their back door? Okay, support them directly. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So go ahead and tell my listeners where they can, you know, find out everything about this. I'm going to plug all this stuff in the episode description as well. So if you guys missed this, you guys can check the show notes, click on all the links, just go ahead and give like a quick rundown to the listeners.
Yes. So if you want to find any information, our website is theenduringcampaign.org. Should I spell that out? I feel like it's okay.
It's pretty self-explanatory.
theenduringcampaign.org. We're also on all social media platforms except for Twitter, because Twitter's lame. As the Enduring Campaign, no spaces. So you can certainly find us there. We're definitely keeping followers up to date. Like I said, every time we support a new transitional center, we will post it. And if it's in your area, we always put their website. Even their website is on our website. So if you want to support them directly, do it. But just know the information is there.
Okay, awesome. Now, the last couple things from me, and then I'll let you go watch WrestleMania, because I know that I'm going to go watch WrestleMania with my kids as well.
I got to see what happens with Randy Orton.
My son is very interested, and he's terrified of the Fiend, so
Mine
he'll
too.
probably have his eyes closed the whole time.
His new mask is so creepy.
It's very scary. So when you look back at your time in the military, what's like the biggest thing that you think your takeaway from it? What's something that you keep with you every day that you think is like the most positive thing?
Family is not always blood. Family is who you make family. And I'm not just talking about veterans. I'm talking about the friends that I've made after that have become my family. It's just, family is who you make it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And, when you think back to your time in, not deployment related, not like the regular things that, everybody kind of like hates or loves. What is like the worst and the best thing about being in the military? It can be something simple as like, the food is awful, or when you're standing, you know, an armed watch and the person that goes to relieve you is 15 minutes late and then you miss chow and then you have to muster and do everything else, you know, like what are like the little inconveniences and then the little wins that you can think back to and you're like, oh, that was such a good feeling or that was such a shitty feeling.
I'll starting with the best, just being the optimist I am. I remember when you go through the airport or like you're wearing your uniform, you feel like a
Yeah.
superstar. And I don't care what anybody says, like people kind of stop and look at you. And I'm not talking about
Yeah.
ECUs or whatever they're called. I'm talking like when I was in my blues and walking through. That was such a cool feeling.
That was.
Another one.
I got first class once.
Yes, you get that, and like
Yeah, it was
people
nice.
will, I don't know, it's you don't even have to thank for your service. It's just like people kind of like look, you know, and that was kind of like you felt so cool. I would say the second one is a lot of the physical parts of it. I wasn't, you know, very athletic growing up, but I was successful like in my PFTs and CFTs. So I know this sounds dumb, but just doing well in those. That was such a cool feeling. Like, oh, your body is it's capable of so much more than you give it credit for. So that was cool. The bad parts about it, duty was always terrible. Always.
Yes.
Standing duty at the barracks was always awful. I think, and then certain aspects of when you don't have the right leadership, especially as a female, that was a really, really difficult part to kind of prove that, you know, you're trying to be a good Marine, but there's just some leaders that have this very misogynistic type mentality and there's nothing you could do. There's literally nothing you could do. So that was pretty hard.
And I think all veterans can agree that, you know, the smells are pretty bad too. You think back to like some of the smells.
You know what? I can look at a boot camp picture and I can smell it. I'm sure there's so many others that I can look at a picture of a bunch of females and be like, I can smell you guys.
You know, it's funny. My wife for years always said like, your uniforms smell like the ship. And I never understood what that meant until like a couple years ago. I was cleaning up my closet and I found my uniform. I was like, oh, why does my uniform smell like stale air? And my wife's like, that's the ship. And I'm like, oh, I can fucking smell it. I can smell it now. It's like, I never knew it.
Yep.
So, all right. So thank you for coming on the show, taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it. Everybody go follow everything that Rachelle's doing. I'll put all of her links in the show notes. And it was really nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
It's awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. And we'll talk to everybody next time on Once Upon a Boot.
Bye.